Beneath the shallow waters off Guadalcanal, more than 50 warships lie silent. A permanent fleet marking one of the most unforgiving battlegrounds of the Pacific War. This is Iron Bottom Sound, where control of a single airstrip sparked a months-long, brutal clash in total darkness. How did ordinary sailors become trapped in a nightly cycle of confusion and sudden peril? The answer reveals what truly turned these waters into a graveyard for navies, and why their echoes still shape our memory of the war. On August 7, 1942, Allied forces launched their first major land offensive in the Pacific by landing on Guadalcanal. The objective was clear: seize the unfinished Japanese airstrip and transform it into a base for projecting air power across the Solomon Islands. Senior planners understood that whoever controlled this airfield, soon named Henderson Field, would command the skies and threaten vital shipping lanes stretching hundreds of miles in every direction. Maps in war rooms traced arcs from Henderson Field, showing the reach of its fighters and bombers. The F-4F Wildcat could defend the immediate approaches. SBD Dauntless and TBF Avenger bombers extended the airfield's influence up to 400 nautical miles. This radius placed nearly all Japanese supply routes and reinforcement convoys within striking distance during daylight hours. For the Allies, the airfield provided a shield for ground troops and a spear aimed at enemy logistics. For Japanese commanders, its capture or destruction became an urgent necessity. The geography of the Solomon Islands made the contest even sharper. Iron Bottom Sound, flanked by Guadalcanal, Savo Island, and Florida Island, formed a natural bottleneck. Any fleet hoping to land troops or supplies had to pass through these narrow waters, often within range of Henderson Field's patrols. The airfield's presence forced Japanese convoys to operate under constant threat, driving them to move at night and rely on destroyers for high-speed runs known as the Tokyo Express. At the command level, both sides committed major naval forces to contest this small patch of ocean. Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Alexander Vandegrift on the Allied side, and Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and General Harukichi Hyakutake for Japan, weighed each move against the risk of losing control of the airfield. Briefings were dominated by map overlays showing the projected reach of bombers, the vulnerable choke points in the slot, and the daily tally of ships and aircraft lost. The campaign's tempo accelerated as each side tried to tip the balance. Daylight brought the threat of air attack. Nightfall offered a window for surface action. The strategic logic was simple but unforgiving. Hold Henderson Field, and you could strangle the enemy's supply lines. Lose it, and the entire Solomon Islands might slip away. This logic would soon drive both navies into a relentless cycle of night battles, each one shaped by the geography and air power that made Iron Bottom Sound so deadly. Night on Iron Bottom Sound brought a different kind of battle. American ships, newly equipped with SG surface search radar, could spot a cruiser-sized target as far as 9 nautical miles away, well beyond what the human eye could manage in darkness. On paper, this was a revolution, but in practice, the edge was never certain. The radar's green blip meant little if the bridge did not trust the reading, or if the information never reached the right officer in time. Many junior watch officers, some barely out of the Naval Academy, found themselves wrestling with dials and headphones, straining to separate real contacts from the static of rain squalls or sea clutter. Training manuals offered diagrams and procedures, but the reality was often a blur of stress and split-second decisions. Across the water, Japanese crews worked with a different doctrine. Their lookouts, drilled for months in low-light spotting and gunnery, manned optical devices, and practiced silent communication. Night after night, these sailors scanned the horizon, sometimes catching the faint silhouette of a mast or the flicker of a searchlight at just 8,000 yards. Their captains trusted the eyes of their men and the discipline of their crews, honed by years of night fighting drills in home waters. The Japanese had no radar, but they knew these waters well and counted on surprise and speed and the devastating reach of their long lance torpedoes. The difference between the two navies often hinged on moments of uncertainty. On an American destroyer, a radar contact would spark hurried plotting, whispered estimates, and tense glances to the captain. Was it friend or foe? Should they open fire or wait for visual confirmation? Identification systems were unreliable, and the risk of friendly fire was real. On Japanese ships, the decision to engage came from the sharp report of a lookout or the flash of gunfire in the distance, instinct and experience guiding action in the space of seconds. Every night patrol became a test of nerves and judgment. Junior officers weighed the promise of new technology against the old dangers of the dark. One wrong move, one misread blip or mistaken silhouette could send a ship and its crew to the bottom. In these waters, uncertainty was as constant as the tide, stalking every decision and every silent approach. The stage was set for sudden, shattering encounters that would decide the fate of fleets before dawn. At 00:56 hours, the first salvo shattered the night. Before that moment, the waters around Savo Island had been thick with uncertainty, every ship's crew straining to pierce the darkness. Allied picket destroyers, stationed to guard the northern and southern approaches, kept their eyes on the horizon and their radar screens alive with static. Yet gaps remained, lines unguarded, signals missed. Coast watchers on distant islands had sent warnings of Japanese movement, but these alerts faltered in the chain of command, arriving too late or not at all for the men on the water. Japanese cruisers, led by Vice Admiral Mikawa, navigated the channel with engines muffled and lights extinguished. Their lookouts, trained for months to read the faintest shadow, kept silent as the formation slipped past the Allied screen. The night air carried only the low thrum of turbines and the distant splash of waves against steel hulls. On board Allied ships, tension grew with every minute. Watch officers debated radar contacts, unsure if the blips were real or just tricks of rain and sea clutter. Some destroyers had repositioned earlier, leaving the northern passage less guarded than intended. The crews on picket duty waited for orders, some convinced the threat was overblown, others uneasy with the silence. At the edge of visibility, Japanese ships closed the distance, their guns already trained on the unsuspecting Allied line. In those final moments before the barrage, the fragility of early defenses became clear, not through grand failures, but through the small lapses and missed signals that let danger slip through the dark. The night after Savo Island became a shock, Allied commanders were left in stunned silence. Within hours, signals traffic across the fleet spiked as officers demanded answers. How could so many cruisers be lost so quickly and without warning? Staff meetings that morning ran long, with senior officers poring over after-action reports and the few fragments of radar logs that survived the chaos. The conclusion was inescapable. The existing picket lines had failed, and the entire approach to night defense needed urgent revision. Within days, new orders circulated. Destroyers and cruisers would form tighter, overlapping radar picket lines, especially along the northern and western approaches to Iron Bottom Sound. Watch officers received updated procedures for reporting contacts, and ships began running more frequent radar drills, even under threat of exhaustion. The old trust in visual spotting alone vanished. Now, radar screens glowed through the night, and operators were under strict instructions to pass every contact up the chain, no matter how uncertain. For the Japanese, the aftermath brought its own reckoning. Vice Admiral Mikawa's decision to withdraw, leaving Allied transports untouched, sparked debate among his staff. Some argued for a second strike at dawn, but the risk of air attack loomed large. Without clear intelligence on Allied air strength, Mikawa chose preservation over pursuit, a move that preserved his cruisers for future action, but left the invasion force intact. Word of the night's outcome spread quickly among Allied crews. The waters around Savo Island took on a new reputation: unpredictable, deadly, and unforgiving. Commanders warned that every passage through Iron Bottom Sound now demanded vigilance and adaptation. The lessons of that night would shape doctrine and drive both navies to commit even more heavily to these waters, setting the stage for a prolonged and bitter struggle for control of Guadalcanal. Night after night, the waters off Guadalcanal became a proving ground for commanders forced to improvise under relentless pressure. Japanese bombardment groups, often led by experienced officers like Vice Admiral Abe and Rear Admiral Nishimura, plotted their approach with the single aim of silencing Henderson Field. Between October and November 1942, these task forces included battleships, heavy cruisers, and destroyers, slipping through the darkness to unleash shells on the airfield. Each bombardment run brought its own risks. The Japanese had to time their arrival for maximum surprise, using the cover of darkness to avoid Allied air patrols. Yet, with every attempt, United States forces adapted. Destroyer screens rotated positions, sometimes changing formation within hours, as commanders tried to anticipate the next assault. Radar pickets watched for movement, relaying contacts up the chain. But the margin for error remained razor thin. On the night of October 13th, battleships Congo and Haruna opened fire, sending hundreds of shells onto the airstrip and damaging aircraft and facilities. The following night, the cycle repeated, with cruisers and destroyers joining in. United States ships scrambled to intercept, but the Japanese often managed to withdraw before a decisive clash. The bombardments did not stop Henderson Field for long. Repair teams worked through the night, and by dawn, planes were again ready to launch. Still, the routine wore down both sides. Crews manned battle stations for hours, nerves stretched thin by the constant threat of sudden attack. As November approached, the tempo only increased. The series of night engagements from November 13th to 15th saw Japanese and American commanders making split-second decisions in the chaos of gunfire and torpedo wakes. Destroyers rotated through patrol zones, sometimes engaging in running battles that left both sides battered. For the men aboard ship, the sense of routine was deceptive. Every night carried the possibility of disaster. The struggle for control of Henderson Field turned Iron Bottom Sound into a place where battle was expected, and survival was never guaranteed. Convoys threading their way through Iron Bottom Sound faced constant disruption. Japanese destroyers pressed into service as high-speed transports ran the so-called Tokyo Express almost nightly, but each run grew more hazardous. Allied air patrols from Henderson Field forced these missions to operate under the cover of darkness, limiting their cargo and increasing the risk of interception. Fuel shortages became a daily concern for Japanese planners. Every extra mile steamed at high speed burned precious reserves, and by late 1942, the strain on logistics was visible in every operational order. Commanders weighed the odds before each sortie, knowing that a failed run could mean not just lost supplies, but a weakened foothold on Guadalcanal. For the Japanese, the shrinking flow of ammunition, food, and medicine reached crisis levels. Reports filtered back from the island, troops rationing rice, artillery batteries short on shells, and wounded men waiting for evacuation that seldom came. Escort commanders agonized over whether to risk their ships for another desperate dash or hold back and conserve dwindling resources. The pressure extended to the Allies as well. American destroyers and cruisers tasked with intercepting enemy convoys and defending the airfield rotated through patrols with little rest. Fuel and ammunition stocks ran low after each engagement, and maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep battered ships in fighting shape. The operational tempo left little room for recovery. Each night's action demanded immediate repairs, new tactics, and fresh resolve. Commanders on both sides faced the same dilemma: how to sustain the fight when every supply run, every battle, chipped away at their strength. The struggle for control of Iron Bottom Sound was not only a contest of firepower or tactics, but a relentless test of endurance. As the campaign wore on, the weight of those decisions settled over the men and machines, shaping the fate of the island and the waters that would soon become a memorial to their efforts. Names etched on brass plaques and carved into stone are only the beginning. Beneath the waves of Iron Bottom Sound, the USS Quincy rests where she fell, her hull a silent witness to the chaos of Savo Island. Alongside Quincy lies the USS Atlanta, lost in the November battles while defending Henderson Field. Not far away, the Japanese battleship Kirishima settled on the seafloor after a desperate night engagement, her crew's fate sealed in the darkness. Each wreck is more than steel and rivets. It is a gathering of stories, ambitions, and unfinished letters home. Official records list the numbers: over 5,000 United States sailors and thousands more from Japan, many with no marked grave but the sea itself. For families, the loss is measured less by statistics than by names read aloud at memorials: Quincy, Atlanta, Hiroshima, each one carrying a weight that endures across generations. A descendant's voice, steady but quiet, recalls a grandfather's name from the roster of the missing. In this place, every ship name is a chapter, every crew a vanished community. The silence over Iron Bottom Sound is not empty. It is filled with memory and with the presence of those who never returned. A century may pass, but the wrecks beneath Iron Bottom Sound remain unchanged, silent witnesses to the events that shaped them. Maritime archaeologists approach these sites with a sense of reverence, knowing each twisted hull and scattered artifact speaks to choices made in moments of chaos. Sonar scans reveal outlines of ships lost in the darkness: Quincy's broken silhouette, Atlanta's battered superstructure, Hirošima's heavy guns now resting in silt. Every detail preserved by salt and time is a page in the unwritten record of battle. Careful documentation is a matter of respect as much as science. These wrecks are protected as war graves under international agreement, their locations mapped but rarely disturbed. Researchers rely on remotely operated vehicles and high-resolution imaging to study the sites without intrusion. No artifact is removed, and nothing is touched unless absolutely necessary for preservation. The work is slow, methodical, and always accompanied by a sense of responsibility. For families and descendants, these ships are more than relics. They are memorials, material anchors for memory and mourning. Each sonar image, each carefully catalogued artifact, is a reminder that beneath the waves, history endures, waiting to be remembered with dignity. Beneath these waters, Over 50 ships remain as silent witnesses, each a marker of choices, risks, and sacrifice. Today, Iron Bottom Sound is both graveyard and classroom, reminding us that peace at sea is never guaranteed. As new generations study these depths, the lessons here still shape how we measure the cost of conflict. Their legacy calls us to remember, so we never repeat what lies below. Share your thoughts below.